Okay, so costs. And for you that have been in the earlier session, a little bit of this will be redundant. But I just want to point out for everybody here that there are a couple of relationships that you need to remember. Total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. And then from that, you can get that average total cost is equal to average fixed cost plus average variable cost. And then the other one that's a little bit mysterious is there's a relationship between marginal cost and variable cost. And so variable cost is equal to the sum of the marginal costs for all of the units produced. Okay, but these three relationships are the key ones. And the other things that you need to remember in order to kind of understand what's coming next, which is a review of competition, is that the minimum of the average total cost is where the marginal cost intersects or is equal to the average total cost. Okay. And there's another condition that's closely related, and I'll tell you about. It's also the case that the minimum of the average variable cost, oh, I should put where, is where the marginal cost intersects the average variable cost. Okay, so those are like the basic relationships. The other thing that we haven't talked about yet is the difference between short run and long run costs, even though this is a topic that we started to touch on last time we were together. Okay, so it's the case for all of these firms that they have a short run cost function and a long run cost function. And the main difference is that, and again, this will show up in different forms, but the main difference is that in the long run, all costs are variable. And another way of saying that, right, is that there are no fixed costs. And in fact, the definition of being in the long run, and I know most people want to think of the long run as being a period of time, and I understand that that's sort of intuitive, but technically the long run has nothing to do with time other than the fact that the long run is a period of time that's somewhat longer than the short run, but it could be a day, a week, an hour, a second longer. Okay, and the real difference is that as long as you have enough time, you know, the assumption is that it takes time to change the fixed costs that you're stuck with in the short run. And as long as you have enough time to change those fixed costs, then you're in a long run scenario. So remember that fixed costs are usually, and maybe I'll highlight that, usually associated with capital costs. And that's machines, tools, equipment, and buildings. Because the thinking is that typically it will take a business a longer time to find a new facility, right? They've got to change the size of their business. They've either got to downsize their factory or get a new factory, or they have to change the equipment that they're using. But that's not always the case, right? So let me talk to somebody really quickly and see if I can tease this out if this makes sense. Riley, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, so you didn't ask any questions about the exam, so I'll just touch on that really quickly. Are you feeling okay about it?
Yeah, I'm feeling good.
Okay, good. So let's pick up on this difference between the short run and the long run, right? And so normally what happens in most economic models, right, is we just group all these things together and we say, oh, you're going to have costs associated with capital and you're going to have costs associated with labor. And so I don't know, think of a business, any business. What business do you want to use for your example?
Let's use Starbucks because I'm running low on coffee.
Okay. Yeah, my wife just poured me another cup, so I'm good. So Starbucks at home. Yeah, so Starbucks. So let's think about, right? So what's Starbucks capital, right? Can you want to give me some examples?
So, we'll do capital like I would think the actual beans would be capital along with like fridges, coffee machines.
Well, okay. So I would say that the beans are probably not, right? Because they probably buy more or less beans on a daily, weekly basis, right? It's not like they're stuck. Right.
Yeah. My bad.
Okay, but yeah, so they have their tables and their chairs, they have their facility, their location, right? And you're talking about a specific like location of Starbucks, I imagine it's not the whole company, but one location. And like their signage and all of those things that they kind of like buy to get the business up and running, right? And I'm sure like their espresso machines, you see those big silver espresso machines in the front, those I know those are really expensive. So that's a machine they use to make the coffee, right? So it's a piece of capital. You agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of that stuff you can put your hands on that's solid and meant to stay around a while is capital, including the building. And those pieces of capital would be fixed costs, right? Because they buy them at the beginning, they buy their big espresso machine, and if they want to expand their location, they probably have to order and get another espresso machine delivered, right?
Yeah.
And if they find out they have too many espresso machines, they're not getting enough business, they want to downsize, they probably have to find some secondhand equipment dealer and sell their espresso machine to get rid of it, right? Or one of the espresso machines. They can't just on a dime like dump it in the trash. Like, I mean, they could, but like that wouldn't be very efficient, right? They would probably try to sell it, and that would take some time. And I imagine, though I don't know this is true, because those espresso machines, the industrial ones are so expensive. I bet you that they rent them, or maybe they lease them, or if they do buy them, they buy them on credit with a loan, and they pay payments like you pay payments on a car, right? I mean, you think that makes sense? Are you with me?
Like, I'm sorry. I was gonna go Google how much one of the Starbucks machine costed. Like kind of. It makes sense to buy it on loan. I don't know if it would make sense for a Starbucks location to rent it though.
Yeah, or lease it. But I guess the main point, or you could even like talk about the building to be a little bit more concrete as something we can clearly classify as a fixed cost. Is their location, they likely rent it, lease it, or if they do buy it, they're buying it and probably paying payments like people do on a mortgage or something like that. But the only point I'm trying to make is that you would say if they decide that they want to change those pieces of capital, it probably takes them a little while to figure it out, right? If they want to find a new location, they probably have to scout out like the costs and the different locations and figure out how much traffic is going to be coming by. It's not something they can do in just a couple days. They probably need some time to plan and do that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So once they're in a planning zone where they can move all of those things that are very costly and otherwise fixed around, then we're in a long run situation. As long as they're stuck with at least one input, so this is the formal definition, okay? So formally speaking, the long run is any, oh, well, hold on. Let me do the short run first. The short run is any period of time where the business is obligated to at, and I'll put this in caps, at least one input. And this meaning they can't change the input they are obligated to, regardless of how much they want to produce. Even if they don't want to produce anything. So like the lease on the building, Riley, if Starbucks, because of COVID, decides to shut down a location, right, they still have to pay their lease. There's nothing they can do about it. So they're stuck with those costs in the short run. Does that make sense? I'm waiting for you, Riley.
Sorry, I opened the chat to unmute, and yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the long run is a period of time where all inputs are flexible. So if you got enough time that you can find a new location, change your number of Starbucks machines, your espresso machines, change everything around. That's the long run. But the thing I was talking about, Riley, is so like normally, right, when we're thinking of fixed inputs, right, we probably will think that the inputs are things that they're stuck with are pieces of capital. It's their machines they're obligated to that for some period of time. They can't, if they're leasing an espresso machine, they can't get out of the espresso machine lease. If they're leasing a location, they can't get out of the lease location for a period of time. And depending upon the terms of the lease, it could be a couple months, it could be a couple of years. And if they're stuck with something, then they're in a short run situation. If they're not stuck with anything, they're in a long run situation. But I'll tell you something that would probably at least be surprising to you is that, so let's talk about the workers, right? So we normally break things down in economics and we say, okay, we have this production function and this cost function. We haven't talked about production functions yet. We'll get a chance to talk about them probably briefly in a little while. But your production function looks like, and I'll say, so normally you have your output, and it's really common to label the output as Q, which is your quantity, right, that you're going to produce, is some function of capital. We use the German Kapital, we use K because we already use C for cost. So you say your output is some function of capital and labor. And if it's a long run production function, then it looks like this, where it looks like capital and labor are flexible. But a short run production function, we'll call it Q hat, is where you have a function of capital and labor where your capital level is fixed at some level. And I'll just put a little caret next to it, where K hat is equal to some number, like let's say it's 100 units. Okay, so that's an example of a short run production function. So do you follow me so far? Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so but the thing that might surprise you is that if we're talking about the laborers, right, you would tend to think that the number of workers you hire is more flexible than the number of machines you're using, right? So I can hire and fire workers, there's no problem, right? I can do that pretty quickly. People can show up to work and be like, you're all fired, right?
I don't think that's how it works.
Oh, you don't think that they could do that?
Like, no, but I understand how labor is
More flexible than
more flexible.
capital?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, just between me and you, I mean, you're right. But it's a cultural expectation. And by the way, just so you know, like private businesses, they can just fire you. You know, if you have like a union contract or you're working for the government and you're a union worker and stuff like that. Yeah, no, in the United States, you can just be fired, you know, without cause, because the business might need to do that because they're like, you know, COVID, we're shutting down, and they might say they're laying you off, but the main point is that they don't intend to pay you anymore. Like you got to go seek some government assistance, unemployment or something like that. Does anybody have a question about that? I don't mean to shock you, Rayleigh, into saying, oh, you can just be fired, you know, but you know, that's you know, my understanding of the employment law. So what do you think about that?
Like, yes. I don't like it, but yes.
Yeah, that's the way it is, right? But you know, it's not that way in every country. In some countries, it's really, really hard to fire people. So I used to live in the Netherlands, and in the Netherlands, and Germany and France, if a company wants to let a worker go, without cause, just say, oh, we're downsizing or whatever. They can't. And they have to go through this process and file all this paperwork. And then they have to give the worker like some amount of time. And in some cases, and I don't know, because I haven't done a comparative study and I'm not up on the latest, German labor law. But it's like 6 months, right? And if you think about it, a lot of these retail establishments around here, like Starbucks, they may have a building lease that that's less than 6 months, right? Normally, a lot of leases are like, you do an annual lease, and then after you've been there for 1 year, it's like a month to month. So you might have to give the landlord just a notice of like 30 days before you can vacate. So my only point in bringing that up is that hopefully you understand it could be the case that we have a short run production function where it's not the case that capital is the one input that's inflexible. Our capital could be flexible and our labor could be inflexible, and that's what's holding us in the short run. In the United States, because of the way that our labor law is, almost all your economics textbooks are going to assume that capital is the one input that cannot be changed quickly. But that's not necessarily true. And so from these production functions, this is how we end up generating costs for the firm. So just like we have short run and long run, and I'll put over here that this is both K and L are flexible. This is the long run situation, but this is how we generate long run and short run cost functions based on the flexibility of the inputs in the production function. If we're stuck with an input in production, then we're stuck with its costs. And so basically, if I want to have and I'm just going to say cost, and cost refers to total cost, but if I have a short run cost function, okay, then it's going to have a fixed cost component and a variable cost component. But if it's a long run cost function, then everything is flexible. So there are no fixed inputs. If there are no fixed inputs, there are no fixed costs, and all costs are variable in the long run. Okay. So that's the main point that I wanted to make. And in most textbooks, you'll see that the costs that become flexible in the long run are the capital costs, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's just whatever is inflexible is holding us sort of hostage, right, in the short run. And in the long run, those costs become flexible. And in the long run, there are no fixed costs at all. Does that make sense, Riley? Are you comfortable? Okay. So so from that, then we end up getting all of these relationships between long run and short run cost functions. And so the ones that we analyze mostly in economics are average total costs. And what's common is the average total cost function that you all are going to be most familiar with. And I'm going to put Q here, is it's going to look like this. It's going to be a U-shaped average total cost function. Okay, so hopefully that looks like a U. And usually that will be paired on a graph with a marginal cost function that looks like this. Okay. And then you want to note that, again, they are going to intersect at the minimum point of the average total cost function. So over here, this will be the ATC minimum. Now, we're interested in these minimum average total cost functions, or this minimum points in the average total cost function, because we know ultimately that firms are trying to maximize profit. So I'll put this over here on the left-hand side. Okay. So firms have the objective of maximizing profit. And last time we said, remember that profit is going to be equal to the total revenue minus the total cost. And I'm gonna stop saying total revenue and total cost, like writing it. I'm just gonna write revenue and cost. And you all are supposed to know that, but that I mean total as opposed to something else. And the implication here is, if you think about it, that if you're trying to maximize profit, right, then it's also implied that you're trying to minimize your cost. Okay, so let me talk to you, German. Are you here this morning? Okay, I don't have German. How about you, Alex Ortega?
Hello.
Hi. So how are you doing? You sound like a robot, Alex. or is that German?
Hi. Yeah.
Oh, hi, German. Good. So are you feel all good about the exam of this coming Tuesday?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And by the way, I think the reason why you're doing the robot thing is because you're getting feedback from your speakers. So if you had headphones, then you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if you can turn down your volume or something like that, because
I did.
yeah. So because I can still hear myself. Okay, but can you still hear me? Because I can't hear me now, so that's better. Yeah, so I'll let you get some headphones, German. This isn't gonna work. So, but Alex, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, and can you turn down your volume?
Turn it down.
Yeah, because otherwise we get feedback. Okay, good. So So profit maximization implies cost minimization. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, do you want to walk us through it, or should I try?
You probably do it better than I can. So
Okay, well, you tell me if this makes sense, right? So I'm a business, I'm bringing in $10,000 a month, right? From sales, right? So if I sell the same amount, $10,000, but I do anything to reduce my costs of production, you see my little arrows over here?
Yeah.
Right? Then obviously my net profit is going to be bigger, right?
Yep.
So profit maximization implies cost minimization, but right, it doesn't work the other way, right? If I minimize my cost, I'm, making things in the most efficient way possible, but I don't sell any of it, I generate no profit. Does that make sense too?
yeah, because you need the sales. So.
Yeah. So profit maximization implies cost minimization, but cost minimization does not imply profit maximization. So we want to be sure that the association just works in one direction, and that's the thing I wanted to point out, to make sure we know every profit maximizing firm will be minimizing its costs, but there could be firms that are minimizing their costs but not maximizing their profits because they're not selling their product at as high a price as they could. They could be giving it away. There's lots of things that could be going on the revenue side, and that's preventing them from maximizing their profits, even though they're minimizing costs. But so I wanna point out that so if we know that firms are trying to minimize costs, how can we identify that on our graph? Well, so you might remember that average total cost is equal to total cost divided by Q, whatever your level of output is, right? So if I say that this is the minimum of the average total cost, which I'm going to do in a minute, but one of the things I'm going to do first is I'm going to point out that this is just an equation that's a definition. Do you see what I'm talking about,
Yeah.
Alex? Right? So I can multiply both sides of this by Q, and I can get Q times ATC is just equal to total cost. So that's just another way of writing total cost. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. And then hopefully you can see that given that the firm is going to produce some quantity, if it's producing the quantity where average total cost is minimized, then that's going to mean that total cost is minimized also. Now, and I'm going to mark this on the graph. I'm going to say that this minimum point is happening at some level of output Q hat, right? So I'm going to over here make this Q that's associated with the minimum. I'll make that Q hat. So you see how this is kind of like a prediction of what we expect a profit maximizing firm will do under certain circumstances. We haven't said all of the details, but this is part of our analysis. Does this make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. So so where do we go from here? So we have this prediction that, well, I'll ask you one other thing. Okay. So we're saying Q hat, let's say Q hat is some number of units. Let's say Q hat is equal to 150 units, right? So I'm saying that given the technology the firm is using and its associated costs, if the firm wants to minimize its costs of production, it'll produce 150 units. Okay, and then its overall its total cost will be minimized. Does that make sense, Alex?
Yeah.
Is there anything else that the firm could do to reduce its costs?
I mean, other than outside factors like new technology, or
Well, we assume based on our costs are being driven by our production function. Production function embeds technology. So I'm saying, no, not outside factors. Is there anything else the firm can do to reduce its costs?
I don't think so.
Well, okay, here's one suggestion. How about the firm doesn't produce anything at all?
You could do that.
Yeah. So remember that even this minimized total cost. So I guess two things I want to point out. That this observation is that given that the firm is going to produce some quantity, right? We don't know what it is, but it's going to produce some quantity, then Q hat will minimize its cost given that it's going to produce. But if it's not going to produce at all, well, then this observation doesn't necessarily apply, right? Because it's still the case that, and I'll put it here in blue, it's still the case the total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. So if the firm chooses to, and the term that we use for this is shut down. And just to be clear, shut down means temporarily produce Q equals 0. So shutting down is different from another term that's important to what we're discussing and we'll discuss in more detail, either in the lectures you're watching online or here in a live lecture. Exiting an industry means permanently shutting down and selling everything off and producing 0 forever. Okay. Does that make sense, Alex? Okay. So you could have a business shut down, and if the business shuts down, remember, then its total costs are only consist of the fixed cost component, right? So it's able to dump all of the variable costs. And in that case, yeah, the firm is going to have some variable costs associated with producing Q hat is equal to 150. All those variable costs go away, and it's just left with its fixed costs, which will be less by definition because the fixed costs don't depend on Q, right? So as long as it's able to dump some of its variable costs, get rid of them, its costs would be less if it's shut down, less than these minimum total costs here. And I'm going to put here like there. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to be talking about going forward, and I'm going to end the lecture today because you all have your exam coming up on Tuesday, and I want to not overwhelm you. But what we're going to be talking about going forward is, given that the firm wants to maximize its profits, if it's in a competitive industry, how is it going to behave, how much is it going to produce, and then under what conditions will the firm decide to shut down. That's one of the things we want to talk about. And when will shutting down be a profit maximizing strategy, meaning the best the firm can do in a temporary situation without permanently exiting. And then we want to talk a little bit about when a firm would make a decision to permanently exit an industry. And then given what those rules are for the profit maximizing behavior for an individual firm, what sort of equilibrium do we expect to emerge from that behavior at the industry level? So how many firms will be in the industry in any given period of time? And we're going to do all of that assuming that the industry is competitive, which is our baseline assumption. And we'll talk a little bit about what competition means. And then from there, we're going to switch and think about how our predictions change if the industry is not competitive. So we've kind of laid the groundwork in this lecture to begin to discuss the issues of how individual firm behavior get embedded in the what we call in economics industrial organization, how an industry is organized, and how much output we can expect from a particular industry. Okay, so do you have any questions, Alex, or?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and